Potential Not Pathology, embracing creative and resourceful approaches to psychotherapy with author and therapist Dr. Paul J. Leslie.
Welcome to Potential Not Pathology, where we offer information and inspiration for mental health therapists who are interested in learning and applying unique therapeutic techniques and concepts into their work. With a focus on the potential each client brings to his or her therapy session, this program examines ideas and tools which can assist your clients on their journey toward healing. I'm Paul J. Leslie. Thanks for being with me today. Today I have I'll just say pleasure, because it's always a pleasure when I get to talk to this person, of interviewing Lisa Dion. Lisa Dion is an author, therapist, an international teacher, a clinical supervisor, and an entrepreneur. Lisa's a pretty remarkable lady. She is very dynamic, and she's the creator of Synergetic Play Therapy and the founder and executive director of the Play Therapy Institute of Colorado. Before anybody says, oh, I don't know if I want to listen to this show, it's about play therapy, which involves small children, and I work with adults. I want to caution you from tuning out, because most everything that Lisa's going to discuss today is completely applicable to adults. So whether you're working with very young children who barely can speak, or you're working with somebody who's 90 years old, a lot of the things that Lisa's going to share with us today is really important information. Lisa offers workshops and supervision opportunities to help therapists develop their skills they need to ethically and effectively work with their child clients. Her method of working with people involves a focus not just on the technical, but also the interaction and the interaction. And that's so crucial, because as we discussed, sometimes we get hung up on technical applications rather than one's own being and how one's own being affects and interacts with the other person or group in the therapy room. To really find out more about Lisa, I highly recommend you go to her website, lisa-dion.com or playtherapycolorado.com. So in this interview, we're going to talk a good deal about how important it is for therapists to be aware of how they're feeling and how their sensations felt in the body, that embodied essence is named and accepted by themselves, and everything from how to avoid burnout to how to create magical transformations within the playroom or the therapy room. So I got a lot out of this interview, and I'm sure you will as well. So let's listen to a wonderful interview with Lisa Dion. Lisa Dion, welcome to Potential Not Pathology.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited for you to be with me today. As we get started, I'd like for you to talk for as long as you like about kind of what brought you to the field of doing psychotherapy.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I was the identified patient of my family. My parents, of course, right? My parents separated when I was 9, and my reaction to that was one of a lot of anger and a lot of acting out. And as such, I got sent to my first therapist. So I was 9 when I had my first counseling experience. And I have to tell you, I remember very, very vividly sitting in the office with my counselor thinking, there's got to be more than this. I didn't find myself connecting very well with my therapist. And in fact, I decided I was going to play mind games with her and figure out how to get out of that as quickly as possible. And I was so successful at it that after 2 sessions, she said to my parents, Lisa's fine, she doesn't need to come here anymore. So my first experience with counseling was actually one of being a bit jaded, just really questioning what was the point of that. I didn't find it very meaningful. And fast forward a couple years, my anger continued, and so I went back to counseling when I was, probably 12 or 13 with a different therapist and had the same experience. And what began to develop in my mind was this question of there's got to be another way. There's got to be another way for a counselor to connect with a child in a way that's meaningful for the child, because I just couldn't find my way with these counselors. So it wasn't, there was such a gift in that, because in many ways, it created the void, or it created the questions in my mind that has propelled me to go on and do what I'm doing now, which is to figure out how to really authentically work with a child specifically in a way that's deeply meaningful for both the therapist and the child. So my journey of not being satisfied led me here. How's that?
That sounds great. A little too familiar for a lot of people, I'm sure, listening.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the void and filling the void. Could you talk a little more about that?
Sure. So, the void in my mind was, I knew I needed support. So it wasn't that I was, as a child, denying that I needed help. I just felt like the individuals that I was working with were not able to provide me with the help that I was seeking, because I didn't feel like they really knew how to connect with me, and I didn't feel like they knew actually how to connect with themselves in order to connect with me. I couldn't feel them really when I look back and really look at what was missing. So that was the void for me. The void was this real sense of, can someone really deeply enter my world, and can someone do it in a way that feels deeply meaningful and fulfilling? And that really sent me on a quest to figure out what that is and what that can be in a therapeutic relationship with a client.
Yeah. I've noticed that you mentioned that the person who's acting as your therapist or multiple therapists weren't really connected to themselves. And I've noticed, and we'll talk about this in just a second, in your play therapy work, one of your philosophies I've read is that the therapist is the most important toy in the playroom.
Absolutely.
And I'd like for you to just tell me kind of your thoughts on that whole, if the therapist is the most important toy or agent of change or whatever, this idea you had that the person was not connected to themselves. We sometimes view the therapist, unfortunately, as outside of the system.
Yes.
And kind of tell me your thoughts about that.
Absolutely. And I'll answer this question also just through the lens of a child as well. Mm-hmm. We know that children learn the most through observation, and that's actually for all of us. But again, I'm going to speak from a child's standpoint. And so children are looking for models of how to, the language I use, how to be human. And they're looking for models around how to handle the feelings and the sensations that are happening in their bodies, how to handle the perceptions in their minds. And for a child, there is a difference between sitting a child down and telling them what to do versus a child having what I think is a privilege to watch somebody else grapple with whatever it is that they're struggling with in the moment, because then they get to see it all in action. And through the mirror neuron system and through the way that children learn, it is such a powerful and effective way for children to learn. Now, having said that, in order for someone to model to a child how to be connected with themselves, how to handle the emotions in their body, how to handle the sensations in their body, then that person must also be connected to themselves. And so that's actually, Paul, I spend a lot of time teaching and training, and that to me, talk about a void, that to me is another void in the mental health field. Is that therapists aren't taught how to have a deep relationship with themselves so that they can then model it to their clients. And so when I say that the therapist is the most important toy, what I mean by that is that the child is coming into the relationship, coming into the playroom, and they are projecting their inner world onto not just the toys, but onto the therapist also. And the language that I use and how we talk about this in Synergetic Play Therapy, the model that I created, is we call it the setup. And the idea is that the child is setting you up, meaning offering you information about what's going on inside of them. And if we are able to take that deep breath and to connect in and ask ourselves what just got handed to us, we actually have a lot of information right there at our fingertips to understand what's going on with the child. And so I'm going to give an example to tie this together. If a child has a perception in their world that they are highly controlled, that child is going to come into the therapeutic relationship attempting to control the therapist. They will set the therapist up to feel controlled. They will try to control the toys. And from there, the therapist's ability to understand and work with that information, to me, is one of the key processes or one of the key pieces of the whole therapeutic puzzle. And so when I say that the therapist is the most important toy, what I'm really saying is that the therapist has all the information that they need to be able to facilitate whatever they need to in any given moment, if they're willing to check in and understand what's happening inside their own minds and bodies. And then the toys in the playroom are just there to bring all of the feelings and the thoughts and the sensations to life to help facilitate the relationship between the therapist and the child. The toys aren't necessary. They're just helpful in facilitating the relationship. In my opinion, what's really needed is the child and the therapist. That's about it.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the flexibility that a therapist, whether they're working with children or adults, need? It seems like a lot of therapists, in order to be authentic, as you're kind of talking about, and be able to enter into another person's world, they need a large degree of behavioral flexibility. What are your thoughts on that, and what recommendations do you have to those listening who'd like to have more behavioral flexibility?
And when you say behavioral flexibility, are you speaking of just the capacity within the therapist, a wider range of options in any given moment? Is that what you're meaning by that?
Exactly.
Great. So the language that I would use is window of tolerance. So the therapist's range, their window of tolerance, right, their capacity to hold or to move towards different experiences rather than need to move away from different experiences. And I think that that's the development of the therapist, really. I think that, when I train therapists and in the work that we do, it's a contemplative practice in many ways, Paul. It is the willingness on the therapist's part to enter the playroom, to understanding that they're going to be asked to feel things that they may not want to feel. But when those feelings and sensations arise, can they pause and take a deep breath and allow the experience to be whatever it is, rather than try to change it or shift it or change the topic or move away from it in some way. So things that are really useful are breath, right? Just taking a breath and allowing yourself to actually feel. Another thing that's really useful is movement. So with a child, that's, I think, a lot easier because children are naturally moving. We can move along with them, whether it's you're playing with a child and you begin to rock, or you rub your hands together, or you stretch your legs out. But using movement in some way to allow your body to open up to whatever it is it's experiencing. When I work with my adult clients, I might, rub my hands together. I might move my feet back and forth, on the floor. I may just shift positions in my chair, but really bringing in conscious movement to allow my body to open. And then the other thing, and this is so controversial, but I'm going to put it out there, is that it's really important for us to name our experience.
Yes.
I think that we're so taught as therapists that we have to check ourselves at the door, and that it's not okay to say out loud to a client what's going on inside of us. And I have to say, I think that that might be the most important piece of the whole puzzle, is our own willingness just to be honest about what's going on in any given moment. And then going back to the modeling and the setup, our clients need to hear it from us as well, because we're, in a sense, then letting them know, you know, it's okay to feel this particular way in this moment. And let me model to you how I handle it as well.
Right. You know, that ability to be authentic and honest, I cannot seem to understand why that has, you know, it's almost paid, and I'm generalizing here, but it's almost paid lip service in training of therapists now. He's, oh, you want to be authentic. And everybody nods their head. And then, okay, well, what the hell does that mean?
Totally.
And it's like, okay, be authentic, but, you know, don't show any emotion.
Yep.
Don't, you know, I remember telling a client one time, you know what, you're really pissing me off.
Totally.
And it worked. I mean, not that we need to berate our clients, but, you know, I'm feeling sad.
Yeah.
Maybe you could say that at certain times, but why do you think there's such a fear on the part of any therapist to kind of be more truly authentic?
I think there's two reasons. I think the first is that in order for us to be truly authentic, it means that we have to develop a relationship with all the different parts of ourselves.
Yes.
And for many of us, because we're all human, there are certain experiences or feelings that we're not comfortable with. And so the idea of, okay, I'm going to be authentic in my sadness, that may be easy for some therapists. But then the idea of I'm going to be authentic in my anger, it's like, no way, because they themselves haven't figured out how to develop a relationship with their own anger. So I think that there can be a fear of, I can't handle it within me, so I can't put it out there to my client, because then the second part is, what if I do damage to my client? What if I hurt my client in some way? What if I shame my client? What if I shut my client down? What if I say something and then the reaction is that my client then tries to take care of me? And we're just not taught how to navigate those situations so that we can just be in it without having, again, to change it, fix it, avoid it, and the experience can just be whatever it is. But I think it starts with the therapist's own range, as you were talking about, their own relationship with themselves, and are they comfortable to go wherever they need to go in their own inner landscape? Or are there areas in their own inner landscape that are, you know, no-go zones?
Right. Yeah. And it's almost like, not to sound too esoteric here, but our clients come in to let us know what we need to work on.
Totally. Absolutely.
I remember I had one that one time told me I was an asshole, and I remember years back that word would have been very charged for me. And I told him, I said, well, that's true, but at least I'm a handsome one. We had fun with it, but I was also, you know, unconsciously, I guess, modeling back that you can handle criticism.
Yeah.
That you can handle that. But, you know, a couple of years later, I was, you know, well, look, it's obvious that you're avoiding what I'm doing and you're picking on me instead of working on your issues, and, you know, gotten all self-righteous about it. But I think they do come in and bring things to help us heal.
Absolutely.
As well.
I tell my students all the time, you know, if you find yourself attracting the same client on your caseload over and over and over again, that's for you. There's a message in there for you. There's a mirror that's presenting itself, and it would behoove you to look into that mirror and to get curious about what the reflection is, so that you can delve into some inner work.
Absolutely. Now, the field of play therapy is not something that I know a great deal about. I've done a good bit of reading, but I'd like, if you have a little bit of time, to really talk about your specific model, which is known as Synergetic Play Therapy. From what I've read, what I've seen, and kind of experienced, you have some videos out, you have, good information on your website. This is really blending a lot of ancient wisdom plus the most up-to-date, neuroscience info. And could you tell me how you came about this particular angle that you're working in?
Absolutely. This is a story that's near and dear to my heart. So I love sharing the story. So I began my play therapy journey back in 2003 is when I first started doing play therapy with my clients. And I found myself in a little bit of a quandary because I saw that the children were changing. There was really great transformation. However, I was leaving the end of my days feeling completely exhausted, just run down, my nervous system just out of whack. I couldn't figure out how to, it didn't make sense to me that I had to be the punching bag, if you will. It's what it felt like sometimes. The punching bag, or I like to call it the trauma trash can. So I was holding all this. The child was healing, and then I was left going, oh my gosh, what do I do with all of this?
Yeah.
And in the field, I wasn't finding what to do with that. And so again, another void started to show up in my mind. I also have a brain that likes to ask the question, why? I like to understand things. I like to understand the details of how things work. And so I was also highly frustrated with the idea that play therapy was a soft science, because I saw these incredible changes with kids, but I was frustrated that the research wasn't able to capture how the process was actually working. It was only capturing that it did work. And that just drove me nuts with my science brain. So both of those set the stage for the story I'm about to share, which was 10 and a half, well, it would be about 11 years ago at the time of the story. I was pregnant, and at 29 weeks in my pregnancy, I was in a hit-and-run car accident. And the impact from the car sent me into labor. And I did not give birth to Avery at that time, so I'll go ahead and tell the listeners that the ending was a good ending. However, the journey that I went on for 3 days in the hospital is where the birth of Synergetic Play Therapy occurred. So I didn't birth Avery, but Synergetic Play Therapy got birthed. So I'm just going to take a deep breath here as I'm telling this story. So I'm going to take a deep breath right now. Listeners, you can take a deep breath too. So I found myself in the hospital, and because I had gone into labor, they were very worried about me, and they told me that I couldn't get out of the bed. They wanted me in the bed, and they wanted me to not really be moving much because they were trying to manage the contractions. And for anyone that studied trauma and impact with trauma, staying still is about the worst thing that you can do.
Yes. No.
So my body did not want to stay still, but I needed to stay still, according to the doctors, just to handle the contractions, but it's not what my body wanted to do. So I'm in bed, I'm not moving, and next to my bed, there were two monitors. And one of the monitors was for me, and the other one was for Avery. And I became completely mesmerized by at times the synchronicity that would happen in our vitals that were showing on the monitor. And then sometimes we were out of sync, sometimes we were in sync, and I just was mesmerized. And I would just lay there staring at the monitors, and it really just captured my attention. And to move along in the story, in order for them to manage my contractions, they were giving me pretty high levels of different kinds of muscle relaxers. And with anything, there's only so much you can have before it's harmful for the fetus. I would argue to say that none of it was helpful for the fetus, but, there's a certain level where it's really not helpful for the fetus. And what would happen is they would give me a dose and my body would calm down. And then once the dose wore off, my contractions would start again. And we did this little dance for a couple of days. Well, fast forward to the second night I'm there. The following morning was going to be the last opportunity for my body to fully calm down. It was going to be my last dose. And I had hit a point where I had it. I mean, really had it. I was feeling really disempowered. I was listening to the doctors. I wasn't listening to myself. My body needed to move, but I wasn't allowing my body to move. I was worried that I was going to be giving birth. And I hit a point where I'd had it. And so I waited until the nurse did her final round, and Avery's dad was asleep on the couch, and it was about 2 a.m, and I literally unplugged. And I unplugged and I got out of bed and I began to trust myself and began to allow my body to do what it needed to have been doing the last 2 days. And so I started moving and stretching and just really tuning in and listening to what my body needed. And what happened was, as I was moving and I was walking around the room, I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirror. There was a mirror, a long mirror on the wall. And I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and I was standing there pregnant in the hospital room, and the realization that I could give birth in the morning became very, very vivid for me. And I don't know how to explain it other than in that moment, something drew me inward. And I remember closing my eyes and trying to feel Avery, not just like where her little feet are or where her bottom was, but energetically feel her, like get a sense of her being. And I remember the moment when I felt her. It was kind of like a click, like there you are. We synced up, and I energetically was with her. And in that moment, I started dancing, Paul. That's what I did. I grabbed my belly and I started moving and swaying, and I felt myself begin to unwind, and I felt her energy start to unwind, and I felt us sync up, and we were just together, just dancing in this room at 2:00 a.m. And we synced up to the point where my body relaxed enough where I actually was able to go back to sleep. So it was a really beautiful, beautiful moment. And then the next morning, my contractions started, and at that point, everything started to spike again, and I'm looking at the monitors, and, Avery's vitals are going bonkers, and so are mine, and I'm anxious. And I remember just saying to myself, no, today's not the day. And I remember taking a deep breath and connecting with myself and recalling the feeling of us dancing together. And I literally felt us sync up again, and I watched our vitals sync up and then get into a rhythm, and my contractions stopped, and we actually went home that afternoon.
Wow.
And the following week, I was in a little bit of a daze from all of it, but I remember thinking, what was that? What happened? And as I grew into understanding what happened, what I realized on a very deep level was that by the way I connected with myself, I was able to deeply connect with Avery. And as such, I was able to impact both of our nervous systems in a way where I was able to co-regulate her.
Yes.
And that's what had been missing for me in the play therapy process for all of those years. That was the missing component. And so that sent me on my journey. I became a high-risk pregnancy after that. And when Avery was born highly dysregulated is the language I would use, which basically means she met all the criteria for a high-needs baby. And I wanted to help my baby. And so I began to go to the library, and I started to read. I started reading medical textbooks and studying anything I could on the brain and on nervous system regulation. And I really wanted to understand what was going on in Avery's body and in my body. And through all of that research is how the model started to come to be. But it really came from that experience that night with Avery and this really deep desire that I wanted to help my kid. The result has been pretty phenomenal because what the model has now turned into is my students tell me all the time, Lisa, this is just a way of being. It's a way of connecting with self and then therefore a way of learning how to connect with other. It's a way of learning how to understand what's happening in your body, how to understand the feedback of the body, how to use that information to co-regulate in the play therapy process to facilitate really deep change with the kiddos. And what used to take so long in the playroom is now happening really, really quickly. And the therapists, this is probably one of my favorite parts, is the therapists are transforming alongside the child because they themselves also have to grow and learn and adapt and take those breaths too. And I just see the change in the therapists that I'm working with, and it's just so inspiring, Paul. It's so inspiring.
Yeah, it is. That's a very inspiring story, and it's almost as if, again, trying to sound too esoteric to listeners, but you had to go through that rather traumatic experience to be able to help, in the way that you are now.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I have students, I share that story a lot when I teach, and I have students that will say, well, how do you feel about the individual that hit you in the hit and run? And my feeling is gratitude. Yeah. I have so much gratitude for that individual because that individual has no idea what they've created.
Exactly.
That individual initiated a whole new paradigm of thinking in my mind that I'm working hard at being able to share with other therapists.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. The theme that I'm hearing more and more as we talk is, again, that how important the therapist is, and it's reminding me back. I write a lot about cybernetics and about in therapy and about what they call second order change, in which the therapist is a part of this system, and the system is whether with one client or a family or whatever. But to really create change, the therapist needs to be aware that he or she needs to change him or herself.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we seem to have lost that perspective. Now it seems like we're focused on techniques. Okay, you need to do this to somebody.
Right.
Whereas, well, if you need to change something, you're a part of it.
Yeah.
So change it. So working with children, and we're really, particularly young children with play therapy, we're talking about a lot of unconscious processing because it's mostly right hemispheric stuff going on. So could you talk about changing yourself to help that unconscious aspect of the child?
Absolutely. So I think you're right on in that right now it seems to be an emphasis on technique and what do I need to do, and let me go take that workshop to learn that, the two steps of this, and then I follow this protocol, and it's helpful. I don't want to say there's not a time and a place for that because those are useful tools. However, it to me, the thing that facilitates the process is not the doing, but the being. Yeah. And I think that's the question that we need to be asking is it's not so much what do I do in the room, it's how do I be in the room? Yes. How do I show up in the room? Because my ability to be in the room and my ability to be in relationship with myself and with my clients, that's actually the change. And neurobiology is showing that. It's showing that deep levels of transformation happen in the brain when an individual is able to engage in right brain to right brain communication. Yeah. And that's the equivalent of attunement between a caregiver and an infant. That's what happened that night in the hospital room with Avery. is that it's the ability to be so attuned with another human being that you are engaging in a high level of nonverbal communication, that you feel each other, that when one individual shifts something in their inner world, the other person actually feels that shift in their inner world. And there's a synchrony that happens back and forth. That's what we know actually heals the brain, not the technique, not the steps. It's the individual and the way that the individual is showing up as they deliver the steps, or if they even need to have the steps in the first place. So with a child, where we're really talking about limbic brain down, we're not really talking about prefrontal cortex.
Right.
We're talking about, as you said, right brain functioning primarily, and we're talking about the world of emotions and body sensations. That's the world of a child, not the planning ahead and the doing type of things that we engage in as adults with our prefrontal cortex functioning. And so for a child, the therapist must be willing to be in that realm.
Yes.
The therapist has to be willing to feel what's going on in their bodies. They have to be willing to shift and move and be flexible with their movement, with their breath, with their experiences. Because if they approach a child from a very cognitive place, they're just missing a big piece of the work, in my opinion. It's not that change won't happen. I just don't think that the change is going to go to the depth that it could potentially go if the therapists were willing to drop in.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Several months back, I was speaking with my good friend Richard Hill, who's the president of the Global Association of Interpersonal Neurobiology, and I was making the comment that the attunement and all the things that you're talking about, that Dan Siegel and these other wonderful researchers talk about, it's a great, almost, dare I use the term, spiritual way of being in the world. And for an agnostic like me, with some Buddhist leanings, it kind of really is comfortable, and it can speak to people no matter what if they have any kind of religious belief or anything like that. Just learning more and more about how our brain works with other brains.
Yeah.
And this wonderful interconnection that we have I think is a wonderful spiritual principle.
Absolutely. That's actually where the word synergetic came from when I was naming the model. I was really looking at what was really happening in the playroom, and the word synergy kept coming to mind, and it's the synergy between my brain and my body, the child's brain and their body, my brain and their body, their brain and my body, the different parts of my brain, how they collaborate with each other, the synergy between myself and my client. And when all of that comes together in an attuned way, the effect of that is so much greater than any individual part could ever have on its own. And so that's where the name came from, is the attunement and the synergy that occurs when there's a really deep level of presence on the part of the therapist.
Yeah. The idea of kind of being in this person's world where there's this interconnection. I'm not hearing anything that you've said so far about working with very young children that's not in concept applicable to adults.
Yes.
And I think that the more we get away from embracing, again, we're using a model of hemispheres, because anybody who's listening, at least and I both know that you need both hemispheres for your brain to work, but using the model of that, some people are left-brained, some people are right-brained. But therapy tends to be too left-brained at times. And anything that you're doing, you're having an experience. And that experience sounds like that's what's creating the change, not the information.
It's actually the experience. So Alan Shore, who's another great figure right now that's bringing wonderful information to the field, he calls it the enactment. So information will arise in a given moment between the therapist and the client, right? So I'm translating this to the child. And in that moment, we're going to have a shared experience. There's going to be a felt sense between us. Whether I become conscious of it or not is a completely different question, but I'm still going to feel it, right? There's going to be a shift that occurs in my body. It's my belief that when the therapist moves towards that and then is able to work with it and name it, that's actually how then they bring the left brain into the equation. So I'm having a right brain felt sense experience. The moment I become conscious of it and I name it and I begin to work with it, now I'm bringing both sides of my brain together to be able to have a conversation about what it is that's occurring. And so I think that that's also why it's important that we're not just feeling it, but we're also allowing it to be conscious and we're naming it as well, which brings the whole piece together.
Now, the tricky part for me, and I'd love to hear your take on this, the wonderful child in the playroom is one thing, but the parent in the waiting room. Tell me about your thoughts on dealing effectively with that issue.
Well, so what specifically with the parents? Just how to work with the parents, or the parent that's what would you love for me to speak about?
Well, that in itself, we'd probably need a couple more hours. But I'm kind of thinking about parents who might not understand, and I don't mean intellectually, but understand this idea of emotional regulation and how to do that. Do you have to go rather didactic for them, or do you include them in an experiential kind of way so that they can learn to attune better, or even to disengage a little bit, because sometimes there's too much attunement at stages, as the kids become and parents become enmeshed and that kind of thing. So just, for in a minute, just kind of how do you deal with those ways to get the parents not just actively involved, but being able to get it down at that deep level?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of it's education. I do a lot of education with my parents, and you're right on that there really isn't a cookie cutter approach with parents, that I'm really looking at each parent and then the parent-child dynamic to assess what needs to happen in that particular relationship. Sometimes I may be working with a parent and they're incredibly left brain, and so they do need to have an experience. If they're open to it, I don't also want to make the assumption that every parent wants to. And so there needs to be education there about the importance of, or permission for the parent to not go there, but then who else can go there so that the child is getting it from somewhere. 'Cause I think that's an important piece, that we sometimes put a lot of pressure on parents to act certain ways or do certain things, but they themselves may not be ready to go there. And I think we really need to look at that cautiously. However, if I have a parent that's willing to go there and open to going there, then it's a combination of meeting with me and me teaching them, and then also giving them experiences. So again, me modeling to them. I think sometimes as therapists, we expect parents to know, hey, go attune with your kid. Well, if no one attuned to them, they have no idea what that means. Yeah. And so sometimes we need to step in and be the external regulator for the parent as they begin to feel what that's like in their body, so they can then translate it over to the child. I also do sessions with the parents in the room when needed. And so oftentimes I'll have parents come in and I'm teaching them how to, through the play, attune with their kids, and how to really feel what's going on and understand the setup and teach the parent how to regulate their nervous system when they're in relationship with their child. So it really depends on what's needed in the system. And to address the enmesh piece, sometimes it is. Sometimes it's about the parent not being in the room. And sometimes it's about actually creating space and distance between the child and the parent so that the child can take a deep breath and figure out how to get a hold of themselves separate from the parent. So it really kind of depends on where we need to go. But oftentimes it's a lot of education.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you talk a little bit about, you've just released a new book, and I think this is a very important book for, certainly for anyone who's working with children, but I think people in general who are in the therapy field. Could you, for a minute or two, just kind of talk about the book and what your goal for it is?
Absolutely. So the name of the book is called Integrating Extremes, and the book is about aggression and death in the playroom, and specifically when children are playing at a really intense or extreme level. Now, that can be taken beyond the playroom, not just in the play, but for when children are acting in extreme ways as well. And so the book is written primarily for therapists. It can also, I've had many preschool teachers and caregivers who've read the book who've also found it incredibly helpful. The gist is that it's written from the perspective of the nervous system. And so what it's helping therapists understand is, first of all, according to biology, why are the extreme states emerging in the first place? And then from there, it's taking the therapist into, I use lots of examples, I try to bring the book to life with case studies and examples and really share from a very personal perspective how I was able to navigate, sometimes successfully, sometimes not so successfully, different situations. But it's about developing the connection that the therapist needs with themselves so that they can then turn around and help the child integrate the extreme energy that they're experiencing in their own bodies. There are also lots of, it's right brain and left brain. So there's the how do we manage what's going on in our bodies? How do we manage the play? How do we hold the level of intensity? How do we take care of ourselves? And then there are chapters in the book which are the what do you do in these situations, because it is important to have both. Yeah.
What advice would you have for any therapist who is finding at the end of the day, kind of going back to what we started with, your experience of kind of feeling beat up at the end of the day, just as a general lifestyle thing they need to do or they might need to do to kind of take some of that burden off them?
Yep, that's a great question. I think another thing that's going on in our mental health field is this belief that we go to work and then we do self-care when we're done with work. Or we do self-care before we go to work, and then we go to work, and then, at the end of the day. And I think self-care, I think it's backwards. I think self-care needs to be something that we're doing throughout the day. So I'm really challenging this idea that we go to work, and then when we're done, then we go take care of ourselves, which is also part of the model of synergetic play therapy. Is we have to find ways, whether you're working with a child or a teen or an adult, you have to find ways to regulate yourself throughout the day. And that means that when you're in session, to become mindful of your own internal states so that you can be taking those breaths as you need to throughout the session. So you can be working with naming your experience out loud. That is a way of regulating. Your ability to be honest and about your experience and to manage what's happening in your body at any given moment calms your amygdala. Research shows it. In between sessions, to mindfully walk, not just go on a walk, but mindfully walk with an intention to move the energy through your body, to in between sessions, to if you haven't been moving all day because you've been sitting in a chair, it's time to move. If you do yoga, do a couple, sun salutations or downward dogs. Or do, just stand there and rub your arms or squeeze your head or, give yourself some physical input periodically throughout the day as a way to hit reset on your nervous system. The more you do it, I guarantee that when 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock hits, you're not going to feel this need to run out of the office and then run to the gym or go grab your glass of wine or whatever it is, because you've been taking care of yourself mindfully throughout the day. I really think that's a paradigm shift that needs to happen in the mental health world.
I agree 100% with that, and that's why I also think it's, if you're working with other people, like other therapists and staff, having good relationships where you can, unload a little bit or tease each other and, see the absurdity of life and enjoy those 1 minute in the hallway fun interactions between clients, I think is really important too.
We have, Paul, so the Play Therapy Institute of Colorado is the one of the businesses that I've created and where I do a lot of my training. We have a regulation room, and it's not for the kids, it's for the therapists.
Nice.
And so in it, we even have large, the big cushions, and therapists are encouraged to take a nap if they need to take a nap. We have music in there. We have balance boards. We have yoga balls. We even have aromatherapy. We have weighted blankets. We have fidget items, that you can fidget in your hands. It's a whole room of supports for therapists to keep their nervous systems regulated throughout the day so they can go in there between sessions.
It's wave of the future, I think.
Yeah.
That's great. That is so great. As we're kind of wrapping up, you've given us so much to really ponder and explore. You mentioned one of your businesses. Could you kind of let people know the best way to find you, more information about your workshops, your personal private practice? What's the best way people can find you?
Sure. So my personal website is lisa-dion.com. And then for those that are interested in Synergetic Play Therapy, that website is synergeticplaytherapy.com. And then playtherapycolorado.com is the Play Therapy Institute website where we do trainings, although those are listed on the other websites as well.
Okay. And I also want to let the listeners know, most everybody who's listening is a therapist generally, that Lisa also does, at least you did, you probably still do, coaching to help other therapists, business coaching. I will just go on record saying I had a session or two with Lisa. God, it's been a year and a half ago, believe it or not.
Yep. And
those were very beneficial to me, and we'll probably do some more of those in the future if you're gullible enough to take me on. But I highly recommend that, and I assume you're still doing that?
I do. So in addition to my teaching and training, I also consider myself very much an entrepreneur in many ways, and so I love to support therapists in developing their practices or developing their dreams or businesses that they're wanting to launch or deepen into. Yes.
That's great. It's fantastic. Well, I know how busy you are, and I just want to tell you that I have really enjoyed this, and you and I probably could talk for another couple of, years.
Yes.
And, I just think you've given us so much information, and whether people listening work with children or not, I truly believe that understanding more about what you're doing will help them with whatever clientele they have. So I really appreciate you being here with me today.
Thank you, Paul. I would love to leave one last message for all of the listeners and even as a reminder for you and I, which is that we're enough. I think that we, as therapists, also spend a lot of time thinking, I need to go to the next training, and I need to go do this, and I need to go do this. And yes, that's helpful. But at the end of the day, our own willingness to be ourselves and to be just incredibly human is really what our clients need, and we really are enough. And if we can sink into that, we have some real magic at our fingertips that we can offer our clients.
Wholeheartedly agree, and I wish I could have said that. I'm going to quote you, and then I'm going to attribute it to myself.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate you being here.
I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you for listening to Potential Not Pathology with Dr. Paul J. Leslie. If you enjoyed the show, check out our website at potentialnotpathology.com, where you will find programs and articles showcasing unique and creative therapeutic applications.